Hello to everybody, my name is Stefano and welcome to this episode of the Think and Analyze podcast. So today we are talking about the fundamental attribution error. Now, for the definition, in order to define what this is, I am reading the definition from Wikipedia, which is, however, the same definition I wanted to tell you guys, but the definition I wanted to tell you is in Italian because I'm studying it from an Italian book, and so I thought that it makes sense to read it from Wikipedia. So the fundamental attribution error is the tendency for people to underemphasize situational explanations for an individual's observed behavior while overemphasizing dispositional and personality-based explanations for their behavior. In other words, we could say that the fundamental attribution error leads us to think that whenever other people act in a certain way, we tend to think that they acted in that specific way because they are like that, because their personality is like that. So basically, we tend to explain that specific behavior with internal causes, with causes that are internal to the person that acted, instead of explaining that behavior with situational causes. So without saying something like, "Oh, it was because he had a very bad day and so he treated me poorly." And this was very interesting. When I came to know this, was quite it struck me in a certain sense because I recognized that I tended to do this to do this fundamental attribution error quite frequently, honestly, especially if I didn't really know the person which I was taking into consideration that well. So, for example, if somebody I knew didn't answer to my messages, then I would think that he didn't answer to my messages because he wanted to treat me poorly, because he or she, that kind of depends, because they wanted to ignore me. And what would happen then is I would ask them why they didn't answer to that message, and they would say something like, "Oh, sorry, my mom felt bad, and so I couldn't really answer to your message, and then I forgot." And so I will feel a little bit bad because I thought bad of them, but still, sort of in my mind, I was like, "Yeah, but I know that you wanted actually to treat me bad." And now, instead that I know this fundamental attribution error, I am much more aware of this, and I am much more careful whenever I make some judgment. And also, this fundamental attribution error was really interesting because I recognized it. I recognized that I did it, even though I tend to regard myself as someone who who really thinks about things and doesn't give superficial explanations. So I really sort of made some sort of soul searching in order, because I recognize that still now that I think I am uh, more prone to think a lot and explain with deeper explanations, I realize that maybe some things may still need some work in order not to lead to bad things. And sort of at first glance, we could say that this fundamental attribution error, in my case, I mean, was my exaggeration, was something that was about me, and I was wrong, basically wrong in thinking that. And if you think that, you are basically committing another fundamental attribution error, because I recognize that I made that fundamental attribution error in regards to messages because it sort of led me into a negative spiral. And this is very interesting because if you tend to commit this fundamental attribution error, then you might sort of, as I said, fall into a bad spiral and fall into a self-fulfilling prophecy, basically, in which you tend to act in a shady way just because you think others treat you poorly, and as a consequence, others treat you poorly, like actually, and so you basically fall into that trap. And that was like this is really, really interesting in my opinion, because at first glance, as I said, you could say something like, "Oh well, the fundamental attribution error. I know that, and so now I'm not going to commit it any time." But you need to be very, very careful of that, because you could already be in a bad spiral, in which started from a fundamental attribution error, and then you could and so now you could not realize that you are in that spiral. And yeah, no, I don't know, that was very, very interesting to me. So basically, to summarize, what happens when you are not aware of the fundamental attribution error? Well, basically you give wrong explanations for other people's actions, and so you tend to judge them negatively, and so there's a very high probability that you fall into the trap of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Moreover, I just realized that when I made the episode about the self-fulfilling prophecy, I remember that I said something like that the self-fulfilling prophecy started because I remember the example with the teacher, because the teacher thought that the student was acting in that bad way, because they wanted to act in that bad way, and that was indeed a fundamental attribution error. So even though I this concept wasn't really formalized, I guess that expression exists in my mind, I sort of caught it, and described in other words, basically. So what happens instead when you are aware of this fundamental attribution error? Well, basically you are much more aware, generally speaking, and you tend to pay attention more to the context in which action take place. Now, as a side note, because I didn't say this, the fundamental attribution error is less frequent in Asiatic, from people from Asia, in Asiatic people, and instead it is more frequent, for example, in our in the Western world, we could say, which is a much more individualistic world, in which it is the individual is regarded as the cause of everything. And so of course, if something happened, then we are much more, I'm talking for me because I am from a Western country, we are much more likely to explain some behavior for with an explanation of like, he is like that. Instead, in Asiatic people, which have a less individualistic society, they pay much more attention to the context in which things take place. Now, I just want to say one last thing, which is the following. The fundamental attribution error may actually be something right. In other words, you may actually be right whenever you think that somebody acted in a certain way because they inherently wanted to act in that specific way. You may be right, but you have to know that not every time you are right. And so, if you are aware of this fundamental attribution error, you know that the cause of something may lie in other things as well. So you need to be aware of that. I don't know, I felt like somebody hearing this fundamental attribution error might think, well, but many times it is true. Yeah, many times it is true, but the other times, if you don't know that fundamental attribution error exists, you are not going to know anything. Instead, if you know that it exists, you are much more aware of everything that happens around you. So this is it for this episode. I didn't really go into the causes of this fundamental attribution error. I believe that it is better to divide into fundamental attribution error itself and the causes. I don't know if I'll make a video about them, but if I'm going to make it, I'm going to make a separated video because they are a little bit more complicated, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it was a shorter video. I just wanted to tell you this this thing, which, as I said, really struck me. So with that said, see you guys.